Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the December Harmon Museum Lunch and Learn. My name is John Zimkus. I am the Education Director and Historian here. There's a lot of things I want you to know. First off, please visit the museum while you're here. We have a fantastic art display on the Golden Lamb, celebrating 200 years of the Golden Lamb. It'll be up until January 6th. You go into the Harmon Museum, you go by the elevator, which has the train on it. You press 1 and it'll open up. We had a contest, over 30 entries. There was a first, second, third place, and an honorable mention. But all the paintings and all the artwork is quite lovely. And there's a very nice display of what we have in our collection concerning the Golden Lamb. So it's one you will thoroughly enjoy. So please take advantage of that. Starting in February, we're going to have samplers from our exhibit. Some of them are samplers which have never been displayed before because we recently received them. So we're talking 24 or more samplers, which will be on through mid-January through February, and I think you will thoroughly enjoy that. This coming, is it this Saturday the 16th? The 16th, we have a lot of things going on here. Between 11 and 1 at our Beetle Cabin next door, Santa and Mrs. Claus will be there. It'll be totally free, so if you want to talk to Santa for a little hints as to what you want for Christmas with only a week or so to go, or if you have a little friend or a grandson, granddaughter, and they might want to meet Santa and Mrs. Claus, please bring them. An hour after Santa leaves, here in the Dunning Auditorium, we're going to have the Bones of Cincinnatus, a 21-member brass ensemble. I had heard them a few years ago, and they were less than half that, and they were fantastic. So with 21 members, all not only Christmas songs but other songs, thoroughly enjoyable. It's only going to be a $5 small donation, and you will have a fantastic time. So please take advantage of that also. The Black and White Ball will be here on New Year's Eve, December 31st, between 6 and 10. We do celebrate New Year's in Greenland. So we will count, watch the ball go down or the icicle or what have you in Greenland, but we're going to have fine hors d'oeuvres, heavy hors d'oeuvres. We're going to have Jay Mills, the fantastic musician from Lebanon. He'll be playing, they'll be dancing. It's a delightful time and fantastic to have in our Dunning Auditorium now with its completed Art Deco decor. It's $70 for an individual, $125 for a couple, or if you want to buy a table, $350. It's going to be a fantastic time, and I think you will enjoy that. Now, as far as lunch and learns in the future go, on Wednesday, January 17th, Julia Dent Grant will be here. First Lady, married to U.S. Grant. Joyce Lovings Browning has helped bring her here. If you've been a member, if you've been here before, Joyce is a fan. I keep on saying fantastic too much. Joyce is a great historical portrayer. She has been Annie Oakley for us. She has been Martha Washington and 3 or 4 other characters, but she does a great job. And she will be here as Mrs. U.S. Grant. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, we're going to have Donna Summers, one of our great supporters, the curator of our Armstrong Gallery of Flight, and also our mid-century modern display. But she is a fine author, but she's here to talk about Tiffany glass. In Jekyll Island, there was a refurbishing of a Tiffany glass window. I believe it was in a church, if I'm not mistaken. And her involvement with that has brought her to do a really fine display, a presentation on Tiffany glass. Tiffany himself, the individual, and how he worked and how his glass work was so much different from other people of that time period. And basically how no one since him has followed directly in his footsteps. The way he did it was so unique. March 20th, also a Wednesday, Easter decorations through the years. Linda Martin, who is a fine volunteer, and she has been here multiple times too. We first became aware of her during COVID. She had I almost said fantastic. She had a great display of collections of Halloween art, Halloween decorations, going back 80 years. And she took up 2 huge 8-foot tables and a lot of things hanging up on the curtain behind it. And then after she did that, she said, "Oh, by the way, I've got Christmas decorations." Well, about a year later, we had her back with her Christmas decorations, going back once again decades. And then after that, she said, "Oh, did I ever tell you I've got Easter decorations?" Well, that's what's going to happen in March. The Easter decorations going back several decades of what you could probably find at the G.C. Murphy's or Woolworths or that sort of thing. Come April 17th, Fred, our speaker, is going to talk about Dickens today and what the real story is behind A Christmas Carol. Dickens, of course, as you may know, did visit the United States twice. And the first time he did come through Lebanon and he did eat at the Golden Lamb. And so what we're going to have the Harmon Museum Historic Players come back. I don't know if you were with us when they went that away around October. We had stories about people who died in the area in some rather unusual ways, and we had members of the staff portraying different people. Well, we're going to have Dickens' visit to America in his own words. So we'll have a portrayer of Dickens, and I bet it's the guy with the beard over there. I'm just guessing that he'll be Dickens, but anyway, and he will read what Dickens said, and then someone else will read, well, this is what the Cincinnati Chronicle said about Charles Dickens coming to town. And this is what Dickens' secretary, George Washington Putnam, said about going through Ohio. So we'll have different people read the exact words these people either wrote about or said at the time. And it should be a lot of fun, and I think you will enjoy it. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to introduce to you the man who I guess will play Charles Dickens, our executive director, Dr. Michael Coyen.
Thank you, John. I'll have to see if my equity card is still good. Anyway, I want to welcome you all, and we received an early Christmas present, a very special one for the Harmon Museum. With the intervention and urging of one of our board members, who's a member of the Turtle Creek chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, Liz Morris, and with the regent of the Turtle Creek chapter, Gail Fisher, we have secured the only place in Ohio, starting in mid-January, to exhibit the American Revolution Experience exhibit, which has been funded by the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution and by the American Battlefield Protection Program. It is an interactive exhibition, an outstanding exhibit that captures the spirit both of organizations showcasing lasting connections to the people and places linked to our war for independence and the emergence of the United States Constitution, which I think we should all be reminded of. Nevertheless, this is a $200,000 interactive exhibit. We've got it before anybody else in the Midwest. And it's an amazing thing we're looking forward to. So that's a Christmas present from the DAR and the American Battlefield Association to all of our members and to the community at large. We're very pleased with that. So I want to thank Gail and I want to thank Liz for their intervention in helping us land that. It's pretty amazing. So as we approach Christmas, less than a week away, I want to wish you all, on behalf of the board, the staff, and all of our volunteers, and Finnegan as well, a very happy and Merry Christmas and a safe New Year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. One of the things that, because you are with us today, there will be a 10% discount on all the items in our gift shop. So if you're looking for stocking stuffers or gifts there, and all the local craftspeople and authors are highlighted in the gift shop, so you know if you're buying something from somebody who lived in our area. One of the things you could purchase there is one of the books written by our speaker today. This is the Arcadia book, Image of America, Lebanon, by Fred Compton. Fred is also the author of another book, Tales of the Inside. Unfortunately, it's out of print now, but if you have a lot of money and you want to go on eBay, you might be able to find it. But he spent over 30 years working at the Golden Lamp, beginning as a busboy, something to do to raise money while he was going to school. And then he decided, well, I'll work here until I find something else. And he stayed there for another 30 years or so, eventually becoming an assistant manager. It's a great book. It's a memoir of him, what it was like working at a very popular restaurant/hotel. Fred has been, over the years, a great friend. I almost said fantastic again. A great friend of us here at the Harmon Museum and the Warren County Historical Society. He was a board of trustee at one time, a treasurer of the association. It's been close to 10 years now, if it hasn't been surpassed, that either in November or in December, Fred is our speaker here for Lunch and Learn. His expertise on early 18th century taverns, inns, travels, and even Charles Dickens, as his speech today will note, is quite extensive. He does a fantastic job. Charles Dickens, of course, as we've already mentioned, visited us in 1842. A year and a half later, he did write A Christmas Carol, his most famous work. But apparently there is a story behind that popular story. And now to tell us about that story behind the story, it is my pleasure to introduce Fred Compton.
Now, I ask the same question every year because we've had problems in the past. Can you hear me? Is that you? Is that me? I think it was you. Thank you, John. I'll tell you, after an introduction like that, I better be good. It's always fun to come back here in November or December, as I say, because I see so many familiar faces, and it's such a familiar place to speak. I always enjoy it. And today we're going to talk about Dickens, briefly touch on his visit to Ohio. You all know the story. But talk about probably his most famous work, which is A Christmas Carol. Hopefully, I'm sure a lot of you have read the book. I mean, it's only 86 pages long. I mean, your Netflix agreement is longer than that. But if you haven't, certainly you've seen one of the adaptations that have been done, either on TV or in the movies, radio. 21 times. 21 feature-length movies have been made about this novel. Earliest one, 1901. 13 years after Edison invented the motion picture camera, someone did an adaptation of A Christmas Carol. Now, it wasn't the whole book. 6 minutes and 30 seconds long. So they couldn't cover the whole thing. but 13 years, it's amazing. And I encourage you, if you don't read the book, if you're going to watch it in black and white. Don't watch it in color. You lose a lot of the charm of the novel and what it has to say. And to me, the best black and white version was done in 1951. And there have been several. But 1951, and that was the Alexander Sim version. And whenever you talk about A Christmas Carol, it's always so-and-so's version, depending on who played Scrooge. The Alexander Sim version of 1951, to me, was the best. Second to that, probably be 1938. And that was a Reginald Owen version of A Christmas Carol. He was playing Scrooge. If you have to watch it in color, if you absolutely have to watch it in color, go find the 1983 George C. Scott version of A Christmas Carol. That was done for TV. Pretty good version. Sticks pretty close, pardon me, to the story. Whatever you do not watch one of the latest adaptations, which was done in 2017 by the FX network, called A Christmas Carol. And if the character names weren't there, if you didn't recognize the story, you would not know it was the same book. It is awful. I unfortunately wasted time watching it. A little different take on the story that you remember. Pardon me. Let me tell you what the IMDb, International Movie Database, says about this 2017 version. The gritty remake, because I just found this a couple of days ago, so I'm reading it. The gritty remake of the iconic tale delivers a cold, depressing story that offers little to celebrate. References to sexual exploitation, gruesome imagery, and child abuse only add to its already depressing nature. Just don't watch it. I did, and it's terrible. So, let's get on. A Christmas Carol. This is the book. Well, not the book. This is a facsimile copy that I got probably 40 years ago. I'm sure we were doing one of our Dickens Christmases and we had these for sale. But small format, same size. And whenever I pull this out, I'm reminded of a Golden Lamb story. I can't get away without telling one whenever I speak. We were always on the lookout for Dickens memorabilia, inexpensive stuff that we could add to our collection. Had a lady call me one day. She had a signed copy of A Christmas Carol. Would we be interested in buying it? I said, sure. He came down a few days later, a little cardboard box, opens up the box, pulls out this kind of tattered looking book. Red cover, small format. First thing I do, of course, is look in the front. Chapman and Hall, 1843, right, copyright date. It's good. It says the good parts in the back. I very carefully opened the book to the cover in the back, and there, pardon me, in a very bold hand is the name, Ebenezer Scrooge. And I had to tell her, ma'am, Scrooge is not a real person. He's a character in the book. And I didn't tell her. And if Scrooge had been a real person and had really signed this, he wouldn't have signed it with a felt tip pen. So I said, I really don't. We're not really interested in this. But this is the book, same size. And Dickens begins by saying, I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea, which will not put my readers out of fate with me, with themselves, or with each other. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay on it. Basically what he's saying is, look, I'm putting an idea out there, okay? If you don't like it, don't blame me. I'm just want to put the idea, and hopefully you're going to think about this. And the book mirrors Dickens' life, early life, in many, many ways. Christmas Carol, the official title is A Ghost Story of Christmas. Now remember that, because we're going to talk about that later. That's very important. A Ghost Story of Christmas. Most people just call it A Christmas Carol. Born in 1812, Dickens came from a large family, had 7 brothers and sisters. He was second oldest, I believe. Spendthrift father and mother, constantly moving from place to place, 2 steps ahead of the landlord who was trying to collect the rent. 1824, when Dickens was 12 years old, his father and mother, and I think most of the siblings, were put in Marshalsea prison for debt. You could be put in jail for debt at that time. Charles somehow escaped because he could work. He was 12 years old. Got a job pasting labels on shoe polish bottles in a rat-infested factory in London. And this change of circumstances at such an early age really planted an idea in his mind. As he wrote once, I had a deep personal and social outrage, which heavily influenced everything that he would write later in life. Of course, formal education, no option for him. He couldn't go to school. And A Christmas Carol was his first novel that was going to be written, published in its entirety. Prior to this, he would write installments, 12,000 words a month. And this was going to be the book, excuse me, that would be published in its entirety. 1841, a year before A Christmas Carol, he had an idea. You wanted to write a different kind of book. You're going to write a travelogue. Travelogues were all the rage in Europe at that time, and nobody had written one on the United States. Dickens was going to be the first. He had this very glowing idea of what the United States was like. There was great fascination with this country who had broken away from England and land of the free, home of the brave. Pardon me. It was very idealistic. So he traveled to the United States in 1842, borrowed some money from his publishers, Chapman and Hall, because he didn't have any money, and traveled to the United States. And he came here primarily for 3 reasons. Number one, he was gathering material for the book, American Notes, which would be written in the summer of that year when he got back. Very uncomplimentary view of the United States. He found Americans kind of obnoxious and pushy. He could not understand this American penchant for shaking hands. He had to shake everybody's hand when he was here. Of course, he had no idea how popular that he was. I mean, he was surrounded by crowds wherever he went. Didn't like being in crowds. Every morning, and he's so popular, every morning, his secretary, Putnam, would have him sit down and sign just blank cards, stack of them. That way, when he was out during the day, somebody wants an autograph, just give him a card. Easy. He never found the United States that he was hoping for. He never found the country, as he said, that had righted all the wrongs of the world. This is not the republic I came to see. This is not the republic of my imagination. So he's very disappointed. Saw the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. Well, he lived through that before, so he knew what that was going to become. Found the same class distinctions here in the United States that he found in London. And again, land of the free? No, not at all. But he probably saved his most scathing words for Washington, D.C. and politicians of the time. And what I'm going to read to you, he wrote this 140 years ago. Okay, 140 years ago. He said of Washington, D.C., was the home of despicable trickery in elections, underhanded tamperings with public officers, cowardly attacks on opponents with scurrilous newspapers for shields, and hired pens for daggers. Look how far we've come in 140 years, right? Yeah. Found a few things that he did like. Liked American prisons, much better than what they had in England. Liked American health care. I mean, for what it was, but it was, again, much better than what people were experiencing in London. And he liked American schools. Now, schools were, of course, in their infancy then, but again, they were much better than what he had experienced, what he had seen, and we're going to talk about that too. Second reason he was here lobbying for universal copyright. Dickens was being ripped off in the United States. People would buy a chunk, 12,000 words, or maybe, collect several of the latest novel, sail across the United States, reset the book in print, and sell it. Dickens wasn't making a dime off of this. And it was legal. It was legal. There was nothing he could do about it because there was no copyright protection for European authors. So he talked to anybody who would listen. He talked to senators, talked to congressmen, talked to the president of the United States. And he got a very cool response. Copyright would not come into effect, universal copyright, until 1891, 21 years after his death. And the reason he got a cool response was 1842, 1841, the country was still in a very serious monetary depression that had been caused by a real estate collapse years earlier, and there was no self-respecting senator or congressman or public official who was going to vote for any kind of law that would send money out of the country. They just weren't going to do it. So his pleas kind of fell on deaf ears. And third reason that he came was, of course, he needed the money. He borrowed money to make the trip. And Dickens was a frustrated actor, so he gave a series of readings for pay throughout the United States to help him pay back the debt that he had to Chapman and Hall and hopefully put a little money in his pocket. So, did American Notes, summer of 1843, just torn to pieces by American critics, and people in England weren't really that interested anyway at that time on the book. So now he's back to writing 12,000 words a month, trying to get by. Well, in a year later, September of 1843, do-gooder Charles Dickens makes a visit to an institution called the Field-Land Ragged School. And ragged schools were something very common in England. They had started around 1840, and this is basically what they were. They just like they described. They were schools for the poorest kids in London, and they were a combination schools, homeless shelters, food banks, but they kind of warehoused people. And Dickens saw the conditions in these schools, and he remembered what he'd seen in the United States. And he was just outraged. He was incensed. And it's kind of unusual. The classes, what little education went on, classes were offered at night. Why? Because the kids were working during the day. Yeah, there was no instruction during the day. They're out working. So Dickens decides that he's going to write a pamphlet. He's going to write a pamphlet about this and sell it. And then he decides, no, this deserves a full-fledged book. He felt that the Victorian society had become kind of a bad and neglectful parent of the poor. And let's talk about that. When you ask somebody about A Christmas Carol and you say, what characters do you remember? Well, the answer always is the ghosts, right? Ghost of Christmas past, present, future, Marley's ghost. Everybody remembers the ghosts. But there's another cast of characters in that book, and they're all over the place, on every page. The book is filled with poor people. There are poor people all over, and that's what the novel was. It was a protest novel. One of many that Dickens would write in his lifetime. And he decided that he would write this book as a protest, and hopefully Victorians would read it and change their ways. Dickens firmly believed that if something wasn't done to help these people, to improve their condition, they were going to rise up and revolt, take over the government, take over the country. And as Dickens said, there's a lot more of them than there are of us. You remember, great scene in the early part of the movie and the early part of the book. Scrooge is asked for a charity donation. Two men stopped by his office. Marley, his partner, had given every year. And Scrooge refuses. And he says, what we need to do is get rid of the surplus population. All these poor people go out and have all these kids, and then we're supposed to support them. And he says, are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons? Well, of course, later in the book, when he's traveling around with the ghost of Christmas present, his words come back to haunt him. And let me read you just a brief paragraph here. When he confronts the two kids, remember that opens his robe, and there are two children. And he says, they were a boy and a girl. Yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility. Are they yours? Scrooge said. They are man's, said the spirit. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware of them both. But most of all, beware of this boy. Ignorance. Now, Dickens wrote the book in 6 weeks, beginning early in October of 1843, excuse me. No outline, no draft, a lot of revisions, but he just sat down and wrote. And again, 86 pages long. Dickens didn't even call it a novel, he called it a novella. So, all excited, he rushes to Chapman and Hall late in November with the book. At this point, his previous novel, Barnaby Rudge, not been a big seller. And the one he was serializing then, Martin Chuzzlewit, not being well received. Chapman and Hall are kind of losing faith in Charles Dickens. And they look at A Christmas Carol, and they say, no, we'll pass. And they refused to publish the book, refused to cover the cost. Charles Dickens took a very bold step in 1843, something very common today and in our day and age, took a very bold step, and he said, fine, I'll publish the book myself. So he is now both the author and the publisher. Only one problem. Once again, he doesn't have any money. So what does he do? He takes an advance from Chapman and Hall and starts his career as both publisher and author. The book came out 2 weeks before Christmas of that year, and it was a publishing phenomenon. Supposedly sold 6,000 copies the first day. Another 3,000 copies were rushed into print before the end of the year. By 1844, a year later, there had been 11 editions of the book published, it was somewhat of a sociological phenomenon. I mean, it got some people thinking. Now, actual change wouldn't occur for decades, but it planted the idea of, hey, maybe we need to do something for these people. The book was a financial disaster. Dickens lost his shirt on this book. You have to remember, he was not only the author, he was the publisher. Having no publishing experience, he said, well, I want to have a low selling price, 5 shillings. I want this book available to the masses. The 12,000 words that he was used to writing were priced out at a shilling an installment. Dickens is going to sell the whole book for 5. Chapman and Hall kind of stand in the background saying, well, not going to be a lot of money left. Dickens didn't care. This was his first novel that was to be published in its entirety. For the first and only time throughout his entire career, Dickens had color illustrations in a book. Had never been done before, and he wouldn't do it again. He hired a very famous illustrator named John Leech. And he had Leech do 4 illustrations. This is one behind me here for the book. Dickens didn't like the first set, so he rejected those and made Leech do them again. And once again, Chapman and Hall are kind of standing behind him saying, you're spending a lot of money here, better watch it. Dickens didn't care. He wanted it to be right. Well, the book kept selling, and in February of 1844, they decided to start to settle up accounts. Dickens got his first royalty check. And again, I'm quoting this to you in US dollars today, make it simple. You got a check for 230 pounds. Today, about 276 bucks. He was expecting 1,000, a little over $1,200. And again, Chapman and Hall said, remember those color pictures you wanted? Remember that low selling price you wanted? Told you. But hey, you're the publisher. A year later, after the 11, 12 editions that have been printed, his total profit on the book was $894. That's all he got because of the low selling price and the high cost of producing the book. To add insult to injury, the book came out in December of 1843. 1844, in January, there were pirated editions of the book being sold in London. They were put out by a company called Parley's Illuminated Library, and they changed a couple of character names, they changed a couple of scenes, but it was A Christmas Carol. It was the book. And of course, copyright violations were civil. They weren't criminal, so he couldn't have them arrested. So what do? Take them to court. Charles Dickens scraped up a little over $1,000 to file suit. And the company that he was suing, Parley's, just kind of disappeared into bankruptcy court. So Dickens never saw a dime. So not only did he lose, or they didn't lose money on the book, didn't make much, lost money on a lawsuit. And it's ironic, I think, Dickens eventually gave the book away. The original manuscript of The Christmas Carol, he gave it away. He sent it to a bookbinder, had it bound, nice leather binding, stamped in gold, and he gave it to a friend of his named Thomas Milton. Now, was he just being a nice guy? Was he being gracious? No. Where do you think he got the $1,000 to go to court? Thomas Milton. He was paying off a debt. And the book itself, the original manuscript, was sold numerous times throughout the 19th century. And so you would think it probably wound up in some dusty library, some collector's library, for no one to see. No, you can see the original. It's only 600 miles away. right before before the turn of the century, around 1900, the book was purchased by the J.P. Morgan Library in New York, and every December they put it on display, and supposedly when they put it on display each year, they turn it over to a new page. So I guess if you can be there 86 years in a row, you can read the whole thing in Dickens' handwriting. A Christmas Carol, of course, was what became such a part of his life. He included it in all of his public readings, did the first one 1850, and he read it 127 times throughout the course of his life, right up until the end of his life, 1870. Now, he didn't read the whole thing, of course. It was an abridged version. He just took an 1849 copy and started crossing things out that he didn't want to include and put some stage direction in there, you know, raise your voice here, lower your voice here, read faster. And that was the copy that he used his entire career. You want to see that one? You can see that one too. It's again only 600 miles away. J.P. Morgan doesn't have that original copy, but the Public Library in the State of New York owns that one, and they do not put it on display, as far as I know. So after A Christmas Carol, Dickens went on to write, of course, 4 more novels: Cricket on the Hearth, Battle of Life, The Chimes, and The Haunted Man. And again, 1844, bad year for Charles Dickens. He'd lost money on A Christmas Carol, lost money in court, running low on money, back to writing 12,000 words a month. And then he decides, I'm going to take a break. Yeah, I'm tired of this fiction stuff. I want to take a break. I want to write another travelogue. Italy, this time. People are fascinated with Italy. And of course, he had no money because he lost it all on A Christmas Carol. And he blamed everything, of course, on Chapman and Hall. The publisher should have told him. The publisher should have stopped him. They said, well, you're the publisher. You were calling the shots. To the point that he breaks with Chapman and Hall, his publisher of probably 20 years, and signs a new contract with a company called Bradbury and Evans, who were printers. Printers. They had printed all the copies of A Christmas Carol. They had no published experience whatsoever. But Dickens found a sympathetic ear in them with what he wanted to do. So I want to take a break from fiction writing. I want to travel. So, but again, he didn't have any money. So what did he do? He gets an advance from his new publishers, Bradbury and Evans, again, borrowing money he didn't have to fund this trip to Italy. He borrowed about $2,000, and Bradbury and Evans kind of hedged their bets a little bit. They had Dickens take out a life insurance policy for $2,000 just in case something happened. But also, he agreed to give them a 25% share of any royalties he would get for the next 8 years. That's how bad he wanted to go. So he packs up the whole family, takes them to Italy. Rented the Palazzo de Peschieri in Genoa. And he travels around Italy and sees some things he liked. He liked the climate in Italy. Thought it was really nice. Saw Mount Vesuvius and thought that was great too. He's very big on natural wonders. When he was here in the United States, he made a big point of, when he left Ohio, my understanding, they were going north to Niagara Falls because he wanted to go north to Canada because he wanted to see Niagara Falls. But while he's in Italy, he's contacted by his new publishers saying, hey, how about another Christmas novel? You know, the last one sold pretty good. This time you might even make some money. And he was thinking about it. But at that point, Dickens was experiencing kind of what writer's block. He could not come up with an idea. And Charles Dickens always worked from a title. Once he had the title, the book was easy. But he had to have that inspiration of a title. And when you think about some of the titles of his books, Hard Times, Our Mutual Friend, The Old Curiosity Shop, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, they're phrases that kind of draw you in, saying, what's going on here? But Dickens did not have that inspiration yet. And whenever I think about this, I think about there was a great, very famous American author in the 50s and 60s, and a lot of you probably recognize the name. Mickey Spillane wrote detective novels. Mike Hammer was his ongoing character. And they were Mr. Frothy novels, short, nothing that ever be taught in a classroom today, but they were popular. And one of the hallmarks of his novel was the mystery was solved in the last 2 pages. No matter what you might have thought, when you get to the very end, the mystery was solved. And he was a very prolific author. He would turn out a couple of books a year. And someone asked him once in an interview, said, how do you do this? How do you write all this, 2 books a year? Spillane says, easy. I write the last page first. That way, I know where I have to end up. All I have to figure out is an interesting way to get there. And it served him very well, but Charles Dickens could not figure out that interesting way to get there. Until one day, one evening, he's sitting there in his room, and he wrote in a letter, all of Genoa lay beneath me. And up from it, with a sudden set of wind, came in one fell sound, the clang and clash of all the steeples pouring into my ears again and again. Hideous vibrations that made my ideas spin around and round till they lost themselves and dropped down dead. We have heard the chimes at midnight, and we are inspired. Now, the Chimes was the book that Dickens thought was the best of the 5 that he wrote. He called it a blast against the system and a sledgehammer of a book that's going to knock the carol right out of the field. Once he had the idea, again, like A Christmas Carol, he couldn't stop writing. He said, I have undergone as much sorrow and agitation as if this book were real. I wept and my face swelled up to twice its proper size, and I was highly ridiculous. Now, the novel is known as The Chimes. The official title of the book is Chimes, a goblin story about some bells that rang out an old year out and a new year in. Remember? Christmas Carol was a ghost story. Ghosts are cute. Ghosts can be friendly. This is a goblin story. Goblins aren't so friendly. So we've graduated from ghosts to goblins. And I think Dickens is telling you, buckle up, people. This one's going to get dark. And it does. Main character of the book is a guy named Trotty Veck. And Trotty is a messenger. His sole job is to carry messages back and forth between wealthy Victorians. And every time he delivers a message, he gets a long speech about the surplus population. And what are all these poor people doing around here? In the book, Trotty is preparing for the marriage of his niece, Meg. And, Trotty can't complain about all these comments because if he does, he'll lose his job. If he tries to defend himself or his niece, who the Victorians are saying, well, basically she's going to get married, go out and have a bunch of kids, and we got to support surplus population. He can't say anything because he may lose a job. But in the book, he begins to believe it. He begins to believe what these people are saying. And he says, talking about the poor population, it seems as if we can't go right or be righted. I can't make out whether we have any business on the face of the earth. Sometimes I think we must be intruding. I am not even able to make up my mind whether there is any good at all in us or whether we are born bad. We are always complained of and guarded against. We always seem to do dreadful things. So he has heard these comments so much that he's convinced. He's convinced that, yeah, maybe we don't have any place on earth. Well, goes to sleep on New Year's Eve, and he is in a dream, much like Scrooge. He is summoned by the spirits of the bells to a church. He's convinced that he's dead, and he sees all the terrible things that happen if he gives up. Meg, his niece, and her husband, Richard, they marry. Richard becomes an alcoholic and dies. A friend of his, Will Fern, is in and out of prison. Another character, Lillian, who is Will's daughter, turns to prostitution. Meg, Trotty's niece, contemplates killing not only herself, but her baby daughter to escape this terrible life. So this is not exactly Cratchit's Christmas dinner or Fezziwig's ball. Well, Trotty wakes up, like Scrooge, realizes he's not dead, and it's the beginning of a new year. Now, if that story sounds familiar, it should. How many in this room have seen the Jimmy Stewart, Donna Reed movie, It's a Wonderful Life, right? They stole that from Charles Dickens. It's the same plot. Georgia goes to sleep, sees the terrible things, wakes up, and realizes that life is pretty good after all. Well, The Chimes is not a story for kids, believe me. If A Christmas Carol is Walt Disney, The Chimes is Stephen King. And I want to read you just a very brief section to give you an idea of what type of novel that it is. Black are the brooding clouds and trouble the deep waters when the sea of thought, first heaving from a calm, gives up its dead. Monsters uncouth and wild rise in premature, imperfect resurrection. He saw the tower with his charmed footsteps and was confronted with the spirits of the bells. He saw them leaping, flying, dropping, pouring from the bells without pause. He saw them of all aspects. He saw them ugly, handsome, crippled, exquisitely formed. He saw them young. He saw them old. He saw them grim. He saw them tear their hair and hear them howl. He saw them soothing people in their dreams. He saw them beating them with knotted whips. He saw them yelling in their ears. He saw them playing softest music. He saw them cheering with some of the songs of birds and the perfume of flowers. He saw them flashing awful faces on the troubled rest of others from enchanted mirrors. He saw them representing here a marriage ceremony, there a funeral. He saw everywhere restless and untiring motion. This Christmas story. The book was pretty popular. Supposedly sold 20,000 copies in the first few months, but it was never as popular as A Christmas Carol. Just didn't gain the traction. Dickens went on. Cricket on the Hearth, 1845. Battle of Life, 1846. Haunted Man, 1848. It stopped. Stopped completely. 1848. So he had basically a 5-year career of Christmas novels. And he stopped for 3 reasons. Number one, he started feeling pigeonholed. that every year people expected a Christmas novel from Charles Dickens. And he didn't like that. He didn't like that. He resented his constant association with the holiday. Secondly, he felt kind of guilty that as the novels were moderately successful, but he was making money off of these people that he was writing about. And he felt a little guilt about that. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, he felt by the fifth book that he was forcing a Christmas story into a situation where it didn't belong, just because people expected a novel from him in December. So he stopped his association with the holiday. In fact, in a letter to his daughter, 1850, he said, "I feel as if I had murdered Christmas a number of years ago, and the ghost perpetually haunted me. But at least we got a Christmas Carol before he stopped. Got that one out of the way first." And as he says in the end of the novel, Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. He became as good a man and as good a master as the good old city had ever seen. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, and he let them laugh. His own heart laughed. And it was said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas as well, if any man possessed the knowledge. May that be said of us and all of us. And as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. Thank you all.
Thank you, Fred. Does anyone have any questions for Fred? Well, I want to thank you all for being here. Fred, I want to tell you, your selections of Christmas Carol versions, I agree with most of them. Alistair Sims is the best Scrooge. Yeah. And if you've ever seen it, he's such a miserly guy, but when he transformed, there is nobody so happy as him. But one I would put up with that, I don't know if you agree with that,
Don't
love
say Bill Murray.
Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol. I really do. I love that. I've got a copy of it at home. Well, folks, thank you for being here. Don't forget, if for stocking stuffers or last-minute Christmas gifts, there's a discount at the gift shop. And also, if you haven't seen the Golden Lamb art display on floor 1 of the Harmon Museum, the elevator will open up and be right in front of you. It is very worth looking. Thank you so very much for being with us. Have a happy holiday and a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next year.